Silent Cal Coolidge. News of Harding's death was sped to Vice President Coolidge, then visiting at his father's New England farmhouse. By the light of two kerosene lamps, the elder Coolidge, a justice of the peace, used the old family Bible to administer the presidential oath to his son. This homespun setting was symbolic of Coolidge. Quite unlike Harding, the stern-faced Vermonter, with his thin nose and tightly set lips, embodied New England virtues of honesty, morality, industry, and frugality. As a youth, his father reported he seemed to get more sap out of the maple tree than did any of the other boys. Practicing a rigid economy in both money and words, Silent Cal became known in Washington conversational circles for his brilliant flashes of silence. His dour, serious visage prompted the acid observation that he had been weaned on a pickle. Coolidge seemed to be a crystallization of the commonplace. Painfully shy, he was blessed with only mediocre powers of leadership. He would occasionally display a dry wit in private, but his speeches delivered in a nasal New England twang were invariably boring. A staunch apostle of the status quo, he was no knight in armor riding forth to tilt at wrongs. His only horse, in fact, was an electrical powered steed on which he took his exercise. True to Republican philosophy, he became a high priest of the great God business. He believed that the man who builds factories builds a temple, and the man who works in the temple worships there. The hands-off temperament of cautious Cal Coolidge suited the times perfectly. His thrifty nature caused him to sympathize fully with the Secretary of Treasury Mellon's efforts to reduce both taxes and debts. No foe of industrial bigness, he let business have its head. Coolidge luck held during his 5.5 prosperity-blessed years. Even a profile in caution, Coolidge slowly gave the Harding regime a bad-needed moral fumigation. Teapot Dome had scalded the Republican Party badly, but so transparently honest was the vinegary Vermonter, and his scandalous oil did not rub off on him. The public, though at first shocked by the scandal, quickly simmered down an alarming tendency, developed in certain quarters to excuse some of the wrongdoers on the grounds that they had gotten away with it. Some critics even commended the government prosecutors for continuing to rock the boat. America's moral sensibility was evidently being dulled by prosperity. Frustrated farmers. Sun-bronzed farmers were caught squarely in a boom or bust cycle in the post-war decade. While the fighting had raged on, they had been raked in money hand over gnarled fist. By the spring of 1920, the price of wheat had shot up to an incredible $3 a bushel. But the peace brought an end to government-guaranteed high prices and to massive purchases by other nations, as foreign production re-entered the stream of world commerce. Machines also threatened to plow the farmers under an avalanche of their own overabundant crops. The gasoline engine tractor was working a revolution on American farms. This steel mule was no cultivation and sowing what the McCormick Reaper was the harvesting. Blue denim farmers no longer had to plod after the horse-drawn plow with a high-footed gait. They could sit erect on their chugging mechanized chariots and turn under and harrow many acres in a single day. They could grow bigger crops on large areas using fewer horses and higher heads. The wartime boom had encouraged them to bring the new tracts under cultivation, especially in the wheat belt of the upper Midwest. But such improved efficiency and expanded agricultural acreage helped to pile up more price-dampening surpluses. A withering depression swept through agriculture districts in the 1920s when 1 farm in 4 was sold for debt or taxes. As a plaintive song of the period ran, schemes abroad for bringing relief to the hard-pressed farmers, bipartisan farm bloc from the agricultural states coalesced in Congress in 1921 and succeeded in driving through some helpful laws. Noteworthy was the Capper-Volstead Act, which exempted farmers' marketing cooperatives from antitrust prosecution. The farm bloc's favorite proposal was the McNary-Hagen Bill, which energetically from 1924 to 1928. It sought to keep agricultural prices high by authorizing the government to buy up surpluses and sell them abroad. Government losses were to be made up by a special tax on the farmers. Congress twice passed the bill, but frugal Coolidge twice vetoed it. Farm prices stayed down, and farmers' political temperature stayed high, reaching a fever pitch in the election in 1924. A three-way race for the White House in 1924. Self-satisfied Republicans chanting "Keep Cool" and "Keep Coolidge" nominated Silent Cal for the presidency at their convention in Cleveland in the simmering summer of 1924. Squabbling Democrats had more difficulty choosing a candidate when they met New York's sweltering Madison Square Garden. Reflecting many of the cultural tensions of the decade, the party was hopelessly split between wets and dries, urbanites and farmers, fundamentalists and modernists, northern liberals and southern stand-patters, immigrants and old-stock Americans. In one sympathetic spasm of discord, the conventioneers failed by just one vote to pass a resolution condemning the KKK. Deadlocked for an unprecedented 102 ballots, the convention at last turned wearily, sweatily, and unenthusiastically to John W. Davis, a wealthy corporation lawyer connected with the Wall Street banking house of J.P. Morgan and Company. The polished nominee was no less conservative than cautious Calvin Coolidge. The field was now wide open for a liberal candidate. The white pompadoured Senator Robert La Follette from Wisconsin, perennial aspirant to the presidency and now 69 years of age, sprang forward to lead a new progressive party. He gained the endorsement of the American Federation of Labor and enjoyed the support of the shrinking Socialist Party. But his major constituency was made up of the price-pinched farmers. La Follette's new progressive party, fielding only a presidential ticket with no candidates for local office, was a head without a body. It proved to be only a shadow of the robust progressive coalition of pre-war days. Its platform called for government ownership of railroads and relief of farmers, lashed out on a monopoly of anti-labor injunctions, and urged a constitutional amendment to limit Supreme Court's power to invalidate laws passed by Congress. La Follette turned in a respectable showing, polling nearly 5 million votes, but cautious Cal and the oil smill Republicans slipped easily back into office, overwhelming Davis, 15,701,211 to 8,385,283 vote. The electoral count stood for 382 for Coolidge, 136 for Davis, and 13 for La Follette, all from his home state of Wisconsin. As the so-called conscience of the Caius 1920s, La Follette injected a badly needed liberal tonic into a decade drugged on prosperity. The times were too good for too many for his reforming message to carry the day. Foreign policy flounderings. Isolation continued to reign in the Coolidge era. Despite presidential proddings, the Senate proved unwilling to allow America to adhere to the World Court. The judicial arm of the still suspect League of Nations, Coolidge only half-heartedly and unsuccessfully pursued further naval disarmament when the loudly trumpeted agreements worked out at the Washington Conference in 1922. A glaring exception to the United States' inward-looking indifference to the outside world was the armed interventionism in the Caribbean and Central America. American troops were withdrawn from the Dominican Republic in 1924, but they remained in Haiti from 1914 to 1934. President Coolidge in 1925 briefly removed American bayonets from troubled Nicaragua, where they had glinted intermittently since 1909. But in 1926 he sent them back, 5,000 strong, and they stayed until 1933. American oil companies clamored for a military expedition to Mexico in 1926 when the Mexican government began to assert its sovereignty over oil resources. Coolidge kept cool and diffused the Mexican crisis with some skillful diplomatic negotiating, but his mailed fist tactics elsewhere bred sore resentments south of the Rio Grande, with angry critics loudly assailed Yankee imperialism. Overshadowing All other foreign policy problems in the 1920s was a knotty issue of international debts, a complicated tangle of private loans, Allied war debts, and German reparation payment systems. Almost overnight, World War I had reversed the international financial position of the United States. In 1914, America had been a debtor nation to the sum of about $4 billion. By 1922, it had become a creditor nation of the sum of about $16 billion. The almighty dollar rivaled the pound sterling as the financial giant of the world. American investors loaned some $10 billion to the foreigners in the 1920s, though even this huge river of money could not fully refloat the war-shelled world of the economy. Americans, bewitched by lucrative investment opportunities in their domestic economy, did not lend nearly so large a fraction of their international income overseas as had the British in the pre-war period. They knew not in the debt tangle. The key knot in the debt tangle was the $10 billion that the U.S. Treasury had loaned to the Allies during and immediately after the war. Uncle Sam held their IOUs and he wanted to be paid. The Allies in turn protested that the demand for repayment was grossly unfair. The French and the British pointed out with much justice that they had held up a wall of flesh and bone against the common foe until America, the unready, had finally entered the fray. America, they argued, should write off its loans as war costs, just as the Allies had been tragically forced to write off the lives of the millions of young men. The debtors also complained that the real effect of their borrowed dollars had been to fuel the boom in the already roaring wartime economy in America, where nearly all the purchases had been made. And the final straw, protested the Europeans, was that America's post-war tariff walls made it almost impossible for them to sell their goods to earn the dollars to pay their debts. Unraveling the debt knot. America's tight-fisted insistence on getting its money back helped to harden the hearts of the Allies against conquered Germany. The French and the British demanded that the Germans make enormous reparation payments totaling some $32 billion as compensation for the war-inflicted damages. The Allies hoped to settle their debts to the United States with more money received than Germany. The French, seeking to extort lagging reparation payments, sent troops into Germany's industrial Ruhr Valley in 1923. Berlin responded by permitting its currency to inflate astronomically. At one point in October 1923, a loaf of bread cost 480 million marks, or about 120 million in pre-inflation money. German society teetered on the brink of mad anarchy, and the whole international house of financial cards threatened to flutter down in colossal chaos. Sensible statesmen now urged that war debts and reparations alike be drastically scaled down or even canceled outright. But to Americans, such proposals smacked of welshing on a debt. "We went across, but they won't come across," cried a prominent politician. Scrooge, like Calvin Coolidge, turned aside suggestions of debt cancellation with a typically tense question. They hired the money, didn't they? The Washington administration proved especially unrealistic in its dogged insistence that there was no connection whatsoever between debts and reparations. Reality finally dawned in the Dawes Plan in 1924. Negotiated largely by Charles Dawes, about to be nominated as Coolidge's running mate, it rescheduled German reparation payments and opened the way for further American private loans to Germany. The whole financial cycle now became still more complicated as U.S. bankers loaned money to Germany. Germany paid reparations to France and Britain, and the former Allies paid war debts to the United States. Clearly, the source of this monetary merry-go-round was the flowing well of American credit. When the well dried up after the Great Crash in 1929, the jungle of international finance quickly turned into a desert. President Hoover declared a one-year moratorium in 1931, and before long all the debtors had defaulted, except honest little Finland, which struggled along making payments until the last of its war debts discharged in 1976. The United States never did get its money, but it harvested a bumper crop of ill will. Irate French crowds on occasion attacked American tourists, and throughout Europe Uncle Sam was caricatured as Uncle Shylock, greedy, whetting his knife for the last pound of Allied flesh. The bad taste left in American mouths by the whole sorry episode contributed powerfully to the storm Southern neutrality legislation passed by Congress in the 1930s.